Alright guys, now in this module, I want to introduce you to the most popular JavaScript library, and it's of course jQuery. Now there's thousands of JavaScript libraries out there, and in later modules, we're going to be exploring some of these libraries. But none of these libraries have been used or downloaded as often as jQuery. So why is that? Well, let's take a look at some code that we've written before. So if we break this code down, essentially what it's doing is it's looking inside the entire document and it's querying for all the elements that have the selector of button. So all of the HTML button elements. And then we're going to add an event listener that is going to detect for clicks on the button. And when it does get detected, then we're going to run the callback function to again look through the document and query for the selector of H1. And then we're going to change the style, namely the color of that H1 to the color red. And we're using a for loop to traverse through all of the buttons on our web page in order to add this event listener and this behavior to all of those buttons. So we wrote this code in our drum kit, and this is pure JavaScript. And it's actually a little bit crazy if you really think about it. In order to do something relatively simple, why does it require so many lines of code? And who's going to take care of all our joint pain from all this typing? Now, you know how sometimes you have these thoughts and you moan and complain about it a little bit and then you kind of get over yourself, right? But not this guy. This is John Riesick. And he was really unhappy with the way that JavaScript worked in web development. He was really frustrated by how unnecessarily complex and lengthy the code had to be. So whereas most of us probably had that thought and we promptly forgot about it, not this guy. John decided that he was going to write a library that would do exactly the same as all of this JavaScript code, but it was as short and as sweet as this. And so jQuery was born. It's a library, so a bunch of code that somebody else wrote that you can incorporate into your own project and use to improve your own projects or to make your life simply a lot easier. Now, we've come across libraries before. Previously, we created websites and we incorporated the Bootstrap library in order to be able to incorporate code that somebody else wrote in the Bootstrap library to make our lives much easier and make it much quicker to improve the user interface of our website. Now, what jQuery allows you to do is take a line of code, say this, where we're looking through the DOM of our website, we're selecting the document, and we're querying for the selector H1. So we're looking for the H1 element in our web page. Now, if we were to use the jQuery library, then we can get rid of all of that and simply say jQuery parentheses H1. And if you want to be even shorter, the shorthand way to write jQuery is simply a $sign. So dollar parentheses H1 does exactly the same as document.querySelector parentheses quotation marks H1. And you can see that it's a lot shorter, and that'll make our JavaScript code a lot easier to read, a lot easier to debug, and a lot faster to write. So we don't have to end up breaking our fingers by typing so much JavaScript code. Alright, so I've spoken so much about how awesome it is. How can we get it and incorporate jQuery into our websites to start benefiting from all of its awesomeness? Well, if you head over to jQuery.com, you can see that just like Bootstrap, you can download all the jQuery code files through their download page, or you can simply use a CDN. Now, previously, we explained what CDNs or content delivery networks were and how they work. So if you're at all confused about this, then take a look back at the Bootstrap module when we talked about this in detail. Now, the most popular option across the web is to use Google's CDN. And as we mentioned before, the beauty of using a popular CDN is that if a user has been to another website that uses the same CDN to fetch the jQuery library, then they'll likely have it already cached and saved in their browser, which means that when they want to load up your website, they won't have to fetch a fresh copy of jQuery. They've already got it loaded and ready to go, giving your website a much faster load rate. So we're going to be using the latest version of jQuery 3.3.1. Now, at the time when you're watching this video, it might just be that it'll be 3.3.2 or a larger number. But I want you to get the latest version with the script tag. And we're going to copy it and we're going to create a new project. Now, I want you to go into your web development project folder and create a new project. And we're going to call this jQuery. And then we're going to drag and drop this into Atom. And then we're going to hit A in order to create a new file. And this is going to be index.html as well as styles.css and also our index.js. All right, so we've got all three files lined up. And now let's head into our HTML, put in our boilerplate, and we're simply going to call our website title just jQuery. We're going to hit save. And now I want you to pause the video and incorporate our CSS as well as JavaScript into this HTML web page. So pause the video now and see if you remember how and where to do that. As we said before, our style sheets should go into the head section of our web page. So in here, just below the title, I'm going to create a link that has a relationship of style sheet, and the href is going to be styles.css. Now let's hit save and let's just test this to make sure that it's definitely working. So we're just going to change the background color of our body to red. And now if I copy the full path of my index.html and paste it in here, there we go. All right, so our CSS is working and linked up. Next step is to include and link up our JavaScript. Now, if you've completed the last module, then you would know that preferably you should include your JavaScript at the end of your website, just before the closing tag of the body. So over here, we're going to include a script with an external source, and the source is going to be index.js. We're going to hit save, and we're going to include some JavaScript code in here just to check that it's working. And if so, we'll just send an alert that says working. So now if I hit refresh, and I get an alert as well as my background being red, so I know that everything is all linked up and I can safely delete these bits of code. Now in our index.html, I'm going to include a number of HTML elements. So firstly, I'm going to have an h1 that just says hello, and then I'm going to have a whole bunch of buttons. And the buttons are just going to say click me, but I'm going to copy this and paste it so that we have 5 buttons in total as well as an h1. All right, so now let's hit save. And I'm going to use the same code that I showed you in the last lesson to write some jQuery that's going to change the text color of our h1 to red. So we're going to start off with the $, which is short for jQuery. So you can either write it like this or you can write it like this. They both do exactly the same thing in jQuery. Almost everybody will be using the $, as a lot of the reason why we're using jQuery is to shorten our code and do less typing. Okay, so I'm going to target the h1 in our document, and I'm going to change its CSS, namely the color property, to red. All right, so now we've got our jQuery code. We're going to be going through all of this code much, much deeper later on. But now all you need to know is that we're using this to select the h1 on our web page, and we're changing its CSS, namely the color property, to red. If I refresh my website, you'll see that nothing has happened because we need to incorporate jQuery in order for this to be valid. Because right now, if you open up the console, you can see that it's telling you that the $, is not defined on JavaScript line number 2. Now that's because the $, if you remember, is jQuery. So if we don't have any jQuery, then it's not really going to work. So let's incorporate it. Now head back to the Google hosted libraries page and copy this script tag. And we're going to paste that above our JavaScript script tag. And now if you hit save and refresh, then you can see that we have no more errors in our console, and the text is now being turned red using our jQuery code inside our index.js. Now, the position where you place your jQuery script tag is really important. For example, if we placed it below our index.js, then you'll see that it no longer works and it no longer colors our text red. And we get the same problem that the $ is not defined in our index.js on line 2. Now the reason is because if you remember, the browser will read the code from top to bottom, and the first thing that it will try to process is our index.js. So it heads over here and it tries to make sense and carry out the instructions in here. And when it sees that $, at this point, it hasn't got hold of the jQuery library yet. So it still doesn't know what this $ and all this short code is all about. So that's why if you're going to use jQuery inside your JavaScript code, then make sure that you place the script tag above it so that by the time it gets into this file, it already knows what the $ is and how all of these shortening methods work. Now, the other way that it might mess up is that if you had both of these script tags inside the head section of your website, then when you refresh your website, you'll notice that, again, it doesn't work. And in this case, it's not even giving you a proper error. And you have to be really careful about including the CDN for our jQuery library in the head section of your website. Because what might happen is that before we've actually finished loading up the entire jQuery library, our index.js might already be trying to access it. So one of the ways that you can safeguard against this is to check whether if our jQuery library is ready. And we do that by using the $ to select our document. And then we use the ready method, and we have a callback function in here. And that means that once our document is ready, then it's going to call this code. So now if we hit save and we refresh, then you can see our code now works because we waited until our jQuery library has finished loading, and then we access the H1 to change its color. Now, when you come across websites, you'll often see this line of code. But another way of doing exactly the same thing is simply to include our scripts at the end of our website, right before the closing body tag. And this does exactly the same thing as this line of code. So when you see me writing jQuery code in the coming lessons, then you'll notice that I don't use that ready method because I always have my jQuery script at the end of my website. And that way, I only try to tap into and manipulate my HTML elements after they've been loaded up and rendered on screen.
Now, for the inquisitive ones amongst you, you might have copied this URL where our jQuery library resides and tried to take a look at it. And if you did, this is what you would see. It looks like a huge mess. But this is essentially the minified version of the jQuery library. And you might notice that it looks very similar from the Bootstrap CDN that we used previously. When you copy the URL there and paste it and load it in your browser, then you can see again you have this huge mess of code. Now, what exactly is all of this? Let's take a section of this and copy it. And inside Atom, I'm going to open a new page. I'm going to show you what this minification does. So essentially, we've still got the same Bootstrap code. So in the case of Bootstrap, then it is CSS. And in the case of jQuery, then it's JavaScript code. But essentially, all of the spaces, the new lines, the comments have been removed from the file to try and reduce its size. But you can see that as I've been combing through this and separating out these lines into the familiar formatting that we're used to, then you can see that it's just CSS code. And this is simply just JavaScript code. And in fact, if you head over to minifier.org, which is a way of converting your JavaScript or CSS code to a minified version. Now, to test it out, I've got our index.js from our drum kit code. And at the top, I'm going to add a comment. This is a comment. And you can see that it's got a lot of spaces, new lines, new paragraphs. But we're going to copy its entirety by just hitting Command or Control A and then Command or Control C. And then we're going to take it over to our minifier and we're going to paste that in. And now we're going to select JavaScript and hit minify. And you can see that it's just crunched everything together and got rid of our comments. So now you can see that our original script was 1,539 bytes. Our minified script is only 1,113 bytes. So we have gained 426 bytes, making our file smaller and therefore quicker for our users to load. And this is exactly the reason why we minify our JavaScript or our CSS, because all of this code has to be loaded up by your user's browser. Now, depending on their internet speed, that may take a short time or a long time. Now, because the browser doesn't care about tabs, indents, spaces, and comments, it completely ignores all of it. There's no point asking the user to load up all of this unnecessary information. And by minifying it, we get rid of those things and make our website load much faster. So if you download the jQuery library straight up, then you'll see something that looks a bit like this. Now, as with all libraries, they'll come with a standard version that is human readable, and they'll also have a minified version that's just intended for the browser. And this is so that you can customize the code if you wish and then minify it yourself, or if you don't want to do any customization, then simply to just drop the jQuery file into your project. All right, so in the next lesson, we're actually going to be getting down and dirty and actually exploring all the things that you can do with jQuery, starting by selecting elements. So for all of that and more, I'll see you on the next lesson.